Imagine the perfect steak, thick enough to be juicy on the inside, crispy on the outside, and made, perhaps unexpectedly, from turkey fillet. This unlikely opening, borrowed from a classic Russian comedy, hints at a deeper truth, a symbol of comfort, of ordinary life, suddenly twisted by history. In that film, a small but significant scene unfolds. A kindly hero is handed an old pistol, just in case. His immediate reaction: shock and discomfort. He hasn't held a weapon since the war. This line wasn't just a quirk of character. It was a wound that cut deep through an entire generation. The director, Leonid Gaidai, had served in army intelligence during the war. The famous actor, Yuri Nikulin, was an anti-aircraft gunner who, like Gaidai, was seriously wounded in battle in 1943. In Russia, as in much of Europe, war scarred every family. It shaped not only private destiny, but a collective identity. For those who didn't witness World War II firsthand, their image of that era was sculpted by stories from veterans, by books, but perhaps most powerfully by films, their solemn black and white images seared into the national consciousness. How do we, today, imagine the Third Reich, the regime that unleashed a catastrophe costing tens of millions of lives? We see Wehrmacht soldiers and passionate Nazis, the cold-eyed men of the SS and Gestapo, executioners portrayed as monsters in unforgettable films like Come and See. But the true prelude to such brutality is quieter, more human, and profoundly more unsettling. Let's go back to the source, long before history books declared good and evil in stark ink. In Germany after World War I, defeat was more than a military event. It was a psychological earthquake. Men returned from the trenches haunted by loss and trauma. Whole cities mourned sons who would never return. Mothers clung to the memories of entire generations, stolen by violence and humiliation. Victorious empires fragmented, old certainties collapsed, and a yearning for hope, any hope, took hold even among the most rational and skeptical. That longing shaped every aspect of public life. It colored politics, heightened the stakes of every argument, and pushed even the discontented and the cynical ever closer to the politics of extremes. This is the stage upon which the Reich first appeared, its promise exploiting not just poverty or humiliation, but a deeply shared sense that the old world was beyond repair. When you have nothing left to lose, the promise of radical renewal becomes dangerously seductive. In countless German families, life limped forward. Uncertain jobs, hyperinflation that made savings worthless, whole streets lined with the unemployed. But true despair lay in the silence, in the eyes of fathers who no longer believed in the future, in the quiet withdrawal of women forced to accept a world that would never be as secure as before. Even school children grew up in the shadow of war, playing games in ruins and listening to stories of glory or horror that colored their earliest dreams. Imagine these children shuffling through ration lines or watching parades of angry men calling for change. Imagine their mothers, half hopeful, half frightened, watching storm clouds gather above their divided nation. Cinemas filled with hungry faces, drawn to films that alternately comforted and unsettled. On the screen, visions of both national pride and collapsed empires, of everyday lives upended by forces far beyond the ordinary person's control. Germany's artists, writers, and thinkers debated how to build meaning from chaos. Some clung to the past, some rebelled, and many simply endured, adapting as best they could to new and unwelcome realities. This shared experience, trauma and yearning, anger and exhaustion, set the stage for what was to come. The seeds of radical change were sown not in grand palaces or smoky backrooms, but in the kitchens and playgrounds, in stories and memories whispered from generation to generation. As a narrator, I invite you not just to witness history's disasters, but to feel this deep, uncertain longing for something new. To understand the rise of the Reich, we must start here, amid ordinary people caught in a whirlwind they did not choose and could not escape. This is the real beginning, soft, almost invisible, but with consequences the world would never forget. Now let's pull back the curtain to see who the Nazis really were and how power consolidated around them. Not every member of German society joined the party out of burning ideological belief. For many, the decision came down to one simple, critical moment: signing a form. One signature could preserve your job as a teacher, or guarantee your family's apartment, or mark you as an outsider in a rapidly changing world. The truth is, Nazi ranks were filled with people of all backgrounds, from ambitious middle-class professionals to veterans nursing old wounds, and from pragmatic opportunists to those who felt deeply wronged by the world. At the heart of this movement was a key characteristic: a deep-seated sense of grievance, almost self-pity, stretching back to the crises of the 1920s. In a Germany rocked by economic depression and political chaos, people who felt harshly treated by fate were quick to suspect that others' happiness was equally unfair. This sense of collective injustice became a powerful motivator, binding together those who both suffered and resented others' good fortune. The Nazis didn't just rely on speeches or tactical maneuvering. They learned to work crowds, perfecting their skills on school children and larger audiences alike. They were, if nothing else, experts in showmanship, knowing when to play on fear, when to promise hope, and when to wrap it all in a veneer of irresistible spectacle. That spectacle found its purest form in the grand events staged for the party faithful. Just 19 months into the resurrection of Germany, Adolf Hitler flew to Nuremberg to meet with his loyal comrades. It was the beginning of a cinematic legend. Triumph of the Will, the infamous documentary of the 1934 Nazi Party Congress. This film is not just a relic of the past. Its stylistic echoes appear wherever a director wants to signal pure evil, whether in the final episodes of Game of Thrones or even across the imagery of Star Wars and classic Disney animations. Triumph of the Will captured, perfected, and exported the aesthetics of Nazism. Under Hitler's personal patronage, the film's team was granted astonishing resources, 280,000 marks and full creative freedom to transform a party rally into a mythic vision of power and unity. Carefully choreographed parades, endless rows of waving flags, ecstatic crowds, and perfectly timed speeches all became the core elements of the Nazi mythos, projected outward to awe and seduce the public. Every frame was designed not just to record, but to inspire faith and fear, to fuse party loyalty with personal identity. But beneath the surface of mass events lay a subtler, more insidious mobilization. The party systematically remade institutions, forging bonds through youth clubs, worker leagues, and relentless propaganda. For young people, joining the party or one of its affiliated organizations seemed like a natural next step. Not a political act, but an initiation into the new Germany. Communities were drawn in not just by ideology, but by a sense of belonging and the promise of a better life, one that was just out of reach in the troubled years before. What's often missed in the grand imagery is the mix of hope and intimidation. For some, the Nazis seemed to offer the order and certainty that years of uncertainty had stolen. For others, Jews, critics, and all those who resisted, these same events signaled a dark future of targeted violence and exclusion. The party's machinery was efficient, rewarding conformity and punishing dissent at every level. The myth of a single unified Germany grew rapidly, but always at the expense of those deemed outsiders. Set against this backdrop, we see that to join, or not to join, the party became the defining choice of a generation. That decision often came less from a grand conviction than from a recognition of necessity. The path to power for Hitler and his followers was paved as much by spectacle and manipulation as by brute force, a blend of propaganda and real, lived insecurity that swept millions along. And so, the triumph of the party was not just political domination. It was the total mobilization of a nation's mind, its anxieties, and its deepest hopes. Step into the world of Nazi Germany's bureaucracy, a place where regulations multiply faster than hope, and even the simplest ambition can become a matter of survival. Let's imagine you are a small entrepreneur, Hans Gruber, trying to run your humble candle workshop. In theory, you're just a craftsman. In practice, the reality is labyrinthine. To legally operate, you must join not only your industry's chamber, but the regional business chamber, and if you're lucky, a relevant cartel as well. This isn't just a formality. Your every move is tracked by powerful government agencies. Maybe it's a subordinate of Hermann Göring himself, for he was put in charge of nearly half the planned economy. If your production costs rise above a certain bureaucratic threshold, even for a month, a commission arrives. Sometimes they pretend to offer help, but most times, help takes the form of confiscation. Your cherished factory, seized and turned over to a favored competitor. Such decisions are made by a web of anonymous officials, a maze of institutions whose inner workings remain a mystery even to those caught within. Suppose you protest. After all, you live in a supposedly lawful country. Perhaps you can appeal to the Minister of Economics. More likely, you'll be told to go speak with the cartel management. Let them decide whether your business still has value or whether it's time for you to move on. Maybe you're permitted to keep your factory, but only if you stop making candles and, starting tomorrow, follow new state-issued orders to produce soap instead, dictated to the last gram by government standards. This is a land where initiative and efficiency aren't recognized. They're punished. The bureaucracy stifles talent. Innovate too boldly or succeed too quickly, and you might just attract suspicion. Success is as likely to ruin you as to win you praise. Each success, each deviation from the average, becomes another reason for the state to intervene, scrutinize, and more often than not, punish. People learn to live with this never-ending uncertainty. The rules are always changing. Official forms multiply exponentially. Nobody can ever be fully sure if they're compliant. Yet obedience remains non-negotiable. The ever-growing network of party organizations, business chambers, and special commissions sees everything, controlling not just how you work, but what you produce and for whom. And so the Reich's promise of order masks a deeper, more chaotic reality. Power flows away from parliament, away from courts and elected officials, into the hands of the unelected and unknown, party bosses and faceless clerks whose judgment is often arbitrary, influenced by hidden loyalties and backroom allegiances. The line between private business, public management, and party authority dissolves, leaving everyone uncertain where the authority ends and where survival begins. From the inside, life under the Reich's bureaucracy is a daily lesson in anxiety. Professionals who once trusted in contracts and the rule of law now navigate a jungle of shifting expectations. The same expert who yesterday was praised for initiative may tomorrow be denounced for individualism. Colleagues avoid eye contact. Rumor and fear replace cooperation. Yet for all its inefficiency, the system is ruthlessly effective where it matters most, dissolving resistance and ensuring loyalty. Every inspection, every meeting, every change of instructions is a reminder that the party's watchful eye sees all, and that every citizen, every product, and every ambition is subordinate to the goals of the state. If you want to know how the Nazis truly commanded Germany, look not just at the leaders, but at the endless queues, the anxious faces in overcrowded waiting rooms, and the mountains of paperwork. In these moments, far from the parades and the pageants, the everyday machinery of control grinds lives into anxious submission. Here, order does not mean simplicity. It means constant oversight, paperwork without end, and a daily negotiation for your right to exist. Let's enter the thunderous, relentless world of Nazi Germany's Industrial Revolution, a place of ambition, steel, and stark moral choices. Imagine the controlled chaos inside a city's great foundry. Steam roars, hammers crash, and men in overalls work until their hands are raw. Above them, unseen and untouchable, men like Hermann Göring move fortunes at the stroke of a pen. Göring doesn't just manage factories, he collects them. With access to state financing, he acquires mines and steel plants one after another. Sometimes he pays, but as his power grows, he more often takes what he wants outright. Where contracts fail, threats and private armies succeed. Imagine it, a convoy of men, neither military nor police, sweeping in to claim newly conquered assets in places like Czechoslovakia's Skoda works. The message is clear. The only rules that matter are those set by the regime and enforced by its enforcers. For industrialists, the game is ruthless and the stakes are life-changing. Fritz Thyssen, once one of Germany's richest men, finds his empire split overnight, half seized by Göring, half awarded to Flick, an insider whose friendship with party bosses guarantees his rise. Protest means exile or worse. Collaboration means influence, favors, and unimaginable profit. But Göring's rivals are no less cunning. Flick and other magnates unite in secretive cliques like the Circle of Friends of the Economy, led by the shadowy and fearsome Himmler. Their tribute, money, resources, gifts, funds projects from human experimentation to occult fantasies. In return, they receive protection, inside information, and the right to exploit camp laborers. Commerce, politics, and terror blurred into one. If you're an ordinary factory clerk or engineer, you are dragged along by tides you cannot control. The pace of production accelerates as war looms, bonds and debt mount. But so does the demand for results, tanks, planes, weapons, all streaming from the relentless factories. Labor is never enough. First, every German worker is pushed to their limit. Then, the regime pulls in prisoners, foreigners, anyone who can keep the machines roaring day and night. Innovation is celebrated, but only for those who play by Nazi rules. Old rivals vanish, their assets redistributed among the obedient. A new elite rises, not necessarily the best or brightest, but the most loyal, the most ruthless. Dinners are held in private salons where tomorrow's contracts and today's enemies are decided in whispers. Yet beneath the glossy facade of economic revival lurks a shadow. Forced labor, lives destroyed to fuel dreams of power, pragmatic deals with the devil for one more loan or shipment. The so-called miracle of Nazi growth is not built on free enterprise, but on broken deals, intimidation, and exploitation on an epic scale. Regular citizens see new goods and jobs, but seldom the cost, the suffering behind the numbers, the silent agony behind every tower of steel. By night, the factories glow with fire and possibility. By day, the true price grows ever steeper. With each conquest, the machine devours more lives, more futures, leaving behind wealth for a chosen few and ashes for the rest. When we speak of industrialization in the Reich, let's not forget, it was not simple progress, but a relentless campaign of acquisition, of domination, of sacrifice demanded and rarely rewarded. So when you picture Nazi Germany's rise, remember not just the rockets and autobahns, but the hidden corridors where deals were made, and the echoing halls where human cost was always the least important calculation. In the dying light of the Reich, a different war was being fought, one not on the front lines, but in the factories, kitchens, and silent, frost-covered city streets. For all its grand illusions, Nazi Germany was running on empty, starved for money, raw materials, and more than anything, hands to keep the machine turning. The myth of limitless conquest vanished the moment steel quotas fell short, coal froze on the rails, and bread lines curled through bombed-out neighborhoods. In 1941, such shortages were no longer rumors. German armaments plants suddenly lacked 12 million tons of steel, the difference between arming an army and stalling a nation. Engineers hurried through icy, echoing halls, searching for substitutes. Workers, men, women, imported forced laborers, pushed on through hunger, exhaustion, and bitter cold, their only rewards ration cards and the distant hope of survival. In the countryside, families huddled by empty stoves while officials knocked on doors for another contribution to the war effort. In the east, prisoners and villagers alike were herded to mines and assembly lines. Even children felt the squeeze, school lessons interrupted by warnings to save scraps, to never waste a crumb of bread. Meanwhile, the great gamble, Hitler's monstrous drive into the Soviet Union, devoured the army's remaining strength. That first frozen winter outside Moscow shattered any pretense of invincibility. Defeat was measured not only in lost ground, but in thousands of lives, in boots without soles, in horses slaughtered for meat. Desperate improvisation replaced grandiose promises. Fritz Todt, the architect behind the Autobahns and the Maginot Line, briefly tried to patch the cracks, diverting mountains of concrete to defensive lines that, in the end, failed to buy even a season's safety. Todt's sudden death in a 1942 plane crash left many whispering about fate and betrayal. His successor, Albert Speer, brought unmatched energy, and still, the gaps only widened. As the Allied blockade tightened, resources shrank, and faith in final victory splintered. On the home front, survival meant outsmarting ration boards, secretly bartering jam for soap, keeping secrets from neighbors who might inform for an extra potato. Devastation left no boundaries. Corruption oozed between ministries. Black markets blossomed in cellars, and the gap between official newsreels and kitchen table reality became a chasm. Mothers traded family heirlooms for fuel. Husbands, if they returned, were shells, haunted by what they had done or failed to do. As exhaustion became chronic, hope grew threadbare. The Reich's public voice thundered about destiny and sacrifice. In every home, people prayed for an ending, any ending. Yet the system's highest cost was not just measured in oil barrels, tank parts, or hectares conquered and lost, but in broken families and lives unmoored by endless struggle. If you want to know how a mighty empire falls, don't only look to its battlefields or statistics. Watch a mother barter her wedding ring for bread, a factory line go silent, a city shiver through the blackout as the last hope of tomorrow flickers and dies. Because when all that remains is survival, the system's limits are not just lines on a map, but the invisible, devastating ceiling hanging over every ordinary life. In the end, beneath the banners, the bureaucracy, and the relentless march of industry, the story of the Third Reich is not simply one of conquest or collapse, but of human cost, of choices made and prices paid by millions. We began with a society wounded by war and loss, longing for order and belonging. Next, we saw how the Nazis harnessed this longing, building a movement rooted as much in spectacle and manipulation as in ideology, sweeping ordinary people into a tide of compliance and complicity. From there, we descended into the maze of bureaucracy, where hopeful reform turned to suffocating control, and survival meant endlessly navigating a system that rewarded loyalty over merit and fear over trust. The industrial boom that followed promised miracles but delivered its riches unevenly, fueled by coercion, exploitation, and the calculated brutality of those determined to win at any cost. And finally, we watched as this system, built on unsustainable dreams, ran headlong into its physical limits, destroyed not just by enemies abroad, but by the hunger within, the inability to produce enough, to feed enough, to care enough for even its own followers. If history offers a lesson here, it is that even the most powerful regimes are fragile when their foundations are built on injustice and denial of reality. No amount of paperwork, industrial output, or propaganda can outlast the corrosion of mistrust and the weight of suffering visited on millions of ordinary people. And so, as we close this chapter, let's remember, true power is always temporary when it fights against the needs and the dignity of those it claims to serve. The rise and fall of the Reich is not just a warning, but a call to cherish and defend the freedoms, the compassion, and the accountability that such times seek to erase. This history is not just about the past, but a mirror for every age that follows,